Hi there, it's Leo from Firecrawl, and in this video, we'll take a look at how you can empower your AI agent node inside of n8n with Firecrawl tools. This right here is the workflow we'll be creating. As you can see, I can type in something like fetch recent AI news. It should be able to identify which tools to use, so either scrape or the search, or if it needs to actually browse and interact with the page, it'll opt into using our browser. Most of these tools are honestly just plug and play, but you should be able to configure a system prompt inside of your agent so that they are used more effectively, because it needs to understand what is the priority of tools that it should be using. So if it were to opt into browser, and there's a example that I like to use for this, which is this website, where if you were to scrape this, you would only get these 4 first results. But with our browser mode, it should be able to click to see more. If the user asked for 20 results, it should also be able to go to the next page, and so on until it finds every data that was required. Now, if I go back to the workflow, restart the session and ask, go to airank.dev and get me the top 20 first LLMs in the main table of the home page. What's happening now is that it first tried to directly scrape, since it already has the URL, understood it didn't have the right capability to scrape everything needed, so it opted to use the browser. Now, this being executed right here is exactly the interactions that I mentioned. It's clicking through the page to fetch for what we need. So after a while, by the way, this took 1 minute and 10 seconds, it was able to fetch for all the 20 models. It actually ranked from page 1 to page 2 and gave us the key takeaways. All right, but now let's actually build this workflow step by step. The first thing I like to add is the AI agent node. This should come with the when chat received node right here. I'll now add a chat model, and the provider we'll be using is OpenRouter, because with this, you're not limited to using either OpenAI or only Claude models. And connecting the LLM that you need is as simple as going over to the OpenRouter website. Let me go to settings, API key. Let me create a new API key, which I will be naming Firecrawl and n8n. Let me make this expire in 1 day, hit create. Now I get the key, go back to n8n, and I will be replacing my past key with this one, hit save. This connection tested successfully should show up. No, thank you. Now let's select a model, and one that I really like to use is the Claude Sonnet 4.6. Since we're not aiming for such a complex workflow, the memory will just be the simple one. So let me add that. Okay, now we're ready to add the Firecrawl tools. If you don't have Firecrawl installed yet, the only difference is that when you type in Firecrawl here and click on the Firecrawl node, you'll have to click the button to install that specific node. This is a verified node from n8n, so it should work seamlessly. Now let's fetch for scrape as well as search. Down here, you'll see all of the different actions that we have. And just to make it simpler for you to understand which are the main nodes, we've added a slash before them. But if I click on this, it'll just create a simple node and not an actual tool inside of the AI agent. For me to add the tool, I'll have to click on this plus sign, then type in Firecrawl, and it'll show up the Firecrawl tools. In here, I'll have to select resource. It's already set to scraping, and we already have the scrape operation. Now, as for the URL, I don't want it to be static. I want it to actually be filled in by the model. So let me click this, as well as leave the parser over to the LLM. Now, you should also add the Firecrawl API key by clicking this button, going back to the Firecrawl dashboard, creating a new key. So n8n Firecrawl, click here to copy your key, go back to n8n, paste it in there, hit save, and wait for the connection tested successfully. After that's done, your agent should connect with Firecrawl just fine. Now let's add the search tool. So again, Firecrawl. In here, I'll select the map and search, and here I'll select search. I'll leave this up for the AI to fill in, as well as this. Maybe you won't want to configure these, but it really depends on what you're building. Maybe what you need to fetch requires a maximum of 3 results, so you'll set this 3, or you want to leave this up for the AI to decide, at which you'll just toggle this, and the AI should select it automatically. All right, so we have our search and scrape endpoints defined. At this point, let's test the agent to see how it performs. Without even adding a system prompt, let's see if the Claude model is smart enough to identify the tools that it has to fetch for whatever we need. So let me type in fetch for recent AI news. Okay, so the first thing it did was use the memory to see if there were anything there. It's now using OpenRouter to look at the tools available. So it proceeded to use search in combination with scrape to search for the full context. And now now it should be reasoning on the data to retrieve a full answer. And by the way, you can follow along with what is being fetched for. So if you click on this log for search in Firecrawl, you'll see everything that was retrieved, the URL, title, description, the scrape endpoint scraped and retrieved a markdown data, which was added to the context window. And maybe you don't want to use all this data, but you can configure this from the node so that it only retrieves essentially what you need. So there's this only main content. You can also exclude specific tags, set for it to retrieve results as if you were navigating the website through your phone. You can define location. Removing base64 images is toggled on by default just to ensure that you're not retrieving huge chunks of text. But even though we didn't specifically add a system prompt, nor did we configure a bunch of different details that we have access to inside of the scrape node, it was able to retrieve a nice amount of news. And this example is searching for news, but it might as well be an enrichment workflow where you can attach a webhook node here, add different Supabase nodes that sends the data off over to your database, respond that webhook. The point is that giving your AI agent or even adding Firecrawl inside of your workflow just empowers it to have access to overall web data. Now, last but not least, let's add browser. To add it, let's select a resource browser, and this is the full context. What we thought is similar to skills from Claude Code, where instead of you having to explain everything to your AI agent of how each different browser tool works, you'll just tell it to look for this tool. And as soon as it executes it, it'll have context of all the other different browser tools available. So now the only thing left to do is add all of the different browser tools. To do so, just follow the same process. Let's select create browser session. Here, you don't necessarily need to let the model define this parameter. So let's skip that. Let's continue adding the tools. So the next one will be the execute browser code. And here you'll want to let the model define this parameter because these session IDs are from the create browser session that we just placed in recently. Let's let the model define this parameter as well. This code refers to what the AI will actually execute inside of that browser session. Let's continue adding Firecrawl tool, browser. And now let's add the list browser sessions because maybe you have a persistent session that's running and you want to ensure that the LLM knows which is the ID for that browser so that it can then get inside of that session. The last operation is delete browser session, just to ensure that the LLM can delete based on a session ID and doesn't leave a bunch of different sessions turned on. Now, if you haven't used the Firecrawl browser yet, this might be a bit confusing to use. So let's go back to the dashboard. You can click on interact with the web. And in here, let's create a persistent session. This persistent session will be called n8n Firecrawl. Let me hit create. What this does is actually spin up an actual browser for us. Here on the left, you can actually test the browser. Just have an LLM use the Firecrawl browser features to go inside of a website and do whatever you need it to do. And not only that, but you can actually interact with the browser inside of our dashboard. So I can type in something like AI news. This will actually fetch for AI news. In here, I can select this first URL. So now that this is persistent, I can go back to my workflow and type in something like use the Firecrawl tool to fetch for an active browser session and only retrieve the ID. Now, ideally, I should add to the system prompt that it should always fetch for browser context in Firecrawl. But since I'm being very specific in my prompt, it will then know what to do. With the persistent session, you can go back to your n8n workflow and have it look for the ID for that session, go inside of it, and perform code executions to navigate through the websites, interact with it, and search for the exact data you need. Now, before moving forward, let's actually give it a system prompt. Just in case you need it, this text will be in the description of the video, and it basically guides the LLM on which tools it should be using, as well as when it should be using them. So for example, the browser context in Firecrawl won't be picked up from the agent automatically. It should understand that it needs to fetch for this tool. Or else, if you tell it to use the browser, it'll just start executing code without understanding which code it should be executing. Now, there's a few recommendations that ensures that you're not spending a lot on this. First of all is the model that you're choosing. When you're first building a workflow, choose a smaller model. An example is the Claude Haiku model. It's still very good, but it's much less expensive. Another example is from Gemini. So Gemini 3.1, I believe. Yeah, 3.1 Flashlight. It's still a cheaper model, but uses tools very effectively. And once you use one of these LLMs to test out your workflow, you'll ensure that you have a pretty great system prompt to do exactly what you need. and you won't be spending so much. Another great tip is to optimize your workflow to do exactly what you need it to do. This is a very generic workflow that I created that works for anything because it should search for any query that I type in here, be it AI news, be it to go inside of a specific website and do a bunch of different things in there to search for whatever I need. But if your case is financial websites that you're scraping, then try to refine this workflow so that the scraper does only that. Maybe you don't even need the AI agent node. And for that, I'd recommend the Building Effective Agents article from Anthropic, just because it shows the many different workflows that you can use that doesn't only depend on a specific agent. And you can see these LLM call examples as if it were the Firecrawl node, just because we actually have an LLM working to fetch for the cleaned markdown data. So yeah, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to leave them down below in the comment section. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Till then.